Today, in this session, I will be talking about the wetland hydrology. Of course, for some of you, it may be well known. Some of them may be aware of little bit, and some of them may not be anything, depending upon their individual interest and specialization. However, I will try to make it as a more interesting, not only for the sake of FDP, also for the to protect the nature where we stand. So in this process, I will be covering some of the major components included as following, such as the hydrological strategy to develop and manage wetland resources for sustainable watershed management. So because I'll try to give the scope of this presentation, what is the reason behind it, with a background of driving forces and issues behind it, and how wetland hydrological studies started, and what should be the strategy, and what should be the technical proposal behind these strategies. So this will give the scope and the why it should be. And before going ahead of these things, then briefly, for who are not aware of the classification system of wetland and how to identify the wetland and introduction to the wetland, here I'll be discussing. Then subsequently, how to delineate the wetland, because see, when we are talking about the wetland hydrology, we need to identify the wetland and its functions, and then what are the values behind it, and what are the types of wetland, and what are their roles in watershed, and above all, so finally, what all the things, technical stuff which we are going to study, ending with the end users. So where the things are going on. So what are the human impacts in the case of wetland losses, degradation, and where all those things are going on, what are the reasons behind it, and how to protect these wetland, and then what are the mitigative measures, and then how it should be managed. Maybe if time permits, I will discuss about the small work carried out by me during my post PhD work. Okay. So is it audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So really, it is quite interesting slide. What really we are facing, the real life, and most of the developing countries. What is happening? It is quite common terms heard. Rivers are drying up, or rivers are flooding, water is polluted, stream banks are eroding, stream ecology is changing, wells running dry, wetland habitat shrinking. See, these are the common things which you listen from last few years to decades. Earlier it was not the case. So if we take the annual rainfall of any given region, it is not varied more than 5 to 10%. But we are facing the case of rivers are drying up, rivers are flooding, the same rainfall occurring, but earlier it was not flooding, but now we are facing the flooding. And earlier water was pure, or the which domestic use and drink, one can drink it, but now we are feeling it is a polluted, and stream banks are eroding, stream ecology is changing. So really, what is the reason behind all these things need to be answered. So one of the major reason along that is a human impacts, which is what interference he has done with the wetland habitat. So this is shrinking, or it is going down day by day. So now we need to be very careful in handling these wetlands to overcome those issues which everybody is saying that, so something going wrong, but nothing going wrong in my view or in nature's view, but that is our perception where we are landing up. So before going to the further discussion, so right top corner, you can see the simple line diagram that shows the wetland at the center, but we can see the three circles. One circle is for air, another one is earth, the another one is water. Where all these three meets, we can expect the wetland, or where air one and earth surface is there, that is what we call it as a upland, and where water and air is there, it is a open water, and where earth and water is the benthos. Of course, these are well-known terms, but now I'm trying to link the terminology wetland where all these three meets. That doesn't mean where all these three meets should be wetland, but it is possibility of wetland. Why this wetland hydrology studies to be studied? As this is a quite common figure which we have come across from the school days. That is how much is the total water, fresh water, and surface and atmospheric water, which is 0.4% of the fresh water. Fresh water is 2.5% of the total water. But now, and what context I'm looking after? This is here you can see out of 0.4%, the 8.5% of water is there in the wetland. Okay, so out of this is also considerable. This is also considerable quantum of water is there. So, or in other words, as an hydrologist, one can say the wetlands are said to perform hydrological functions which act like a sponge, which acts like a sponge. So what it does, the soaking of water during the wet period and releasing it during the dry period. So the problem for this river flooding and river drying up is already lies here. See, during the heavy intensity of rainfall or the high intensity of rainfall, if wetlands exist in that watershed sufficiently, it will try to store that water and release the same thing during the dry period. So during the non-rainy seasons, you are saying that rivers are drying up. If you would have maintained the earlier wetland, then these two answers would have given. So then we will come to know that how this water polluted and stream banks are eroding. This again continuation we will try to answer. We will try to already answer exists in the nature. Only thing is the attitude towards the nature from bureaucrats to technocrats is required. And finally, end users society. Okay, now one can see the what all the users, because always everyone asks anything to be studied or anything to be given interest, one should think that why I should study, why I should give interest, what is the reason behind it, is there any benefit to the me or individual or society or nature. So if we just try to concentrate what are the users of wetlands, where all it is connected, then I find it is quite good users. So you can find it in the harvesting craft material, building material, mining of minerals from wetlands, biodiversity. So in biodiversity, when you call it as, that is a what environmentalists they call it as, the wetland is having a maximum number of species. That is, it is what they call it as supermarkets for species. And then the ecotourism nowadays from last few decades, wildlife research, health and recreation, housing and industry, forestry, transportation, and water supply, fishery, agriculture, livestock, and crop production, where we generally civil engineers, particularly water social engineers, concentrate on agriculture, and so on. So now wetland is not two new subjects, but is already we are aware of that. So what really made me to think on this line? So wetlands are getting converted to agriculture lands, and that context the paper presented by one of our Indian person only, that is Bridge Gopal. he has tried to concentrate the wetlands through alteration of hydraulic regimes and siltation and pollution. So that is making a threatening whether we have to select wetlands or we have to go for the enhancement of agriculture activities in this wetland areas. So he has made a small eye during even 2002 itself. So now where we go ahead. So once you see that in the what we are looking for in the present scenario, always we talk about the environment. When we talk about the environment, water, soils, hydrology, biodiversity, land use, and then the indigenous knowledge in the environmental. And then when we think about the socio-economics, we think about the economic resource, population requirement to fulfill and other things. And then the policy people, they think about the national policy, NGOs and government. But when you come across the environment and policymakers, then they decide about the land use and also sustainable management. And like that, finally, it is the wetland management is not a single organization can handle. There is so many things involved and this that we'll discuss in subsequent slides. In this context, the research and technical assistance is required to fulfill the wetland mitigative measures in coming years. So in that context, what we are thinking that how best one can take the sustainable water management. Once I say that the sustainable water management to fulfill the poverty reduction, we should know that what is wetland, what are the wetland indicators, what are the functions, what are the values, and what are the wetland indicators, and among them wetland hydrology. Okay, now with the wetlands, of course, I'll come back again the same slides in the subsequent. Just to introduce, because I'm talking about wetland, so what are the types of wetland? Briefly, I can say it. So you might have heard the terms bogs, vernal pools, wet meadows, wet prairies, and so on. So these are mainly dominated by the source of water is precipitation. So mainly the source of water is precipitation. The contribution from groundwater and surface water is in this type of wetlands are less. And similarly, for groundwater dominated, so what you can say, almost more than 33% of the water is contributed by groundwater. Here, in this case, I'll say more than 33% of the water from the precipitation. And here, surface water, that is what marshes. So it is more than 33%. It is again a tentative term. There is no hard and fast exactly 33 and so on. Okay. So just to, when you hear these names, wetland names, fens, seeps, marsh, and something freshwater marshes. So that indicates that what is the main source of wetland, the water source for this wetland. And what are the main process and values? Again, I'll come back this in the detail in subsequent slide. Now, to make that what I talked, now we can see it, whatever the precipitation occurs in the uplands, it enters to the ground, and in the subsurface flow, sometimes it may reach the groundwater table. Some of the portion of the water, it seeps in the foothill. Okay, so here one can expect the wetland, and particularly in this portion. Okay, and next, here what you are getting is the groundwater, and here we are getting a surface water or this depression storage. Okay, and then again, see in these portions one can expect the wetland. So simple line diagrams where the groundwater contributed wetlands one can expect it, along with the other percentage of source of water, maybe from precipitation or from the river, that is surface water. Now, why we are taking up this discussion? What should be the hydrologic strategy to develop and manage wetland resources for sustainable watershed management? So now I am going to put the questions. So that to answer that, the basics we are going to learn it in or discuss in the subsequent things. What are the driving forces and issues behind it? And what hydrological studies we are going to do it, and what should be the strategy, and what all the common questions need to be answered by technocrats, and what should be technical proposal, one by one. See why issue has taken up the wetland hydrology. Increasing rural, urban, and rural government links, which is making to understand this wetland, and particularly in the hydrological process. And then continuous dependence on the local for the biomass and other necessities in the wetland, and rural improvement. So wherever the wetland is there, they're trying to use that thing because they under the impression it is wetland is not much useful or so. And then the modernization, the new technology has come, and they have realized that wetland is having a much resource. Nowadays, the ecotourism in the most of the European countries already started 1 or 2 decades. But now India is also going to start this wetland areas as a ecotourism. And then widening the market and increasing the local, urban, international demand and certain wetland products. And then the traditional cultural emphasis on rice and rice cultivation, which making to encroach these wetland. And then the increasing concerns on the environment and wetlands and political changes and so on. We can give the big list, and above all, the climate change. Always, if we could not answer with some means, then everybody is putting on the climate change. That is, of course, it here also, but not mainly because of climate change. It is mainly because of the human interference. So that's what I mean to say. The hydrology as a driving force. So for the wetland, I think you can see the simple line diagram, which is showing the terrestrial system, wetland, deep, aquatic. See, before entering to the any open water bodies, there is a buffer which is supposed to be a wetland. And in most of the locations, we have lost this wetland because of one other reason. So what are the main characteristics of this wetland which you find it? The hydrology generally intermediately permanently inundated, and it is going to be a source or a sink for biochemical role. See that I'm answering now. So whatever the precipitation occurring in the terrestrial system, there will be a surface runoff, okay, overland flow, which need to pass through this wetland before reaching the deep water. So nothing but this area was acting as a sponge, so which stores the water during the more water is available and releases the water to the natural stream when there is no flow. One thing, that is drying and flooding. And next, when it is overland flow is there, it carries the nutrients. So that nutrients is or the waste, it will not directly enter to the freshwater body. Then it becomes a sink. It becomes a sink. And next, the same sink, it purifies that and then release the fresh water. So now wetland values have increased. And then whatever it is, nutrients stored during the detention period, and it is get converted to the productivity. So wetland vegetation. So that is, it is giving answer what we started with the earlier slide. And the same thing with another fashion, I'm pinpointing it is when there is a groundwater contribution, not only the water and the nutrients. So here we can see the wetland, how the hydrology, biochemical role, and productivity. So there as a driving force, which I already pinpointing. So not only a climate, the geomorphology also affects, and physico-chemical environment, that is nothing but a soil chemistry and so on, and biota, that is what you call it, the vegetation, animals, microbes. That is why the most of the environmentalists, they call it as wetland is a supermarket for a biodiversity. Okay, then we are as in water resource engineers, we are going to concentrate on the hydrology, how this hydrological characteristics in wetland varies over the time. So what really makes the here, what are the direct effects? But vegetation is a biotic feedback for this hydrology. See what I mean to say, this, if it is water is there and then there is no vegetation, biotic, then this will not act as a wetland. It will not act as a wetland. So then what are the driving issues need to be addressed? So now the improved wetland management is how best it can be done. But sometimes the authority or society who are not aware of the wetland values and process, they feel it is a anti-development luxury. Anti-development luxury. I don't know where we land up with this statement. But however, wetland values need to be incorporated for development planning. That is what needs to be driven as a issues, and wetland benefits need to be stabilized, preserved, and enhanced. So what all the values should be addressed? So then it is a value added to the wetland products need to be increased, especially for the items with export potential. So the environmentalists can give a much highlight and this realities. And of course, now the wetland hydrological studies, keeping all this thing in mind as a what finally the hydrologists think. So whenever you are talk about the hydrology as a civil engineers, we start with what is hydrology and what is hydrological cycle, and what is the mass balance. What are the main components of hydrological process, and where all the storage. So the same thing, that is a closed system, but now it is a open system. It is a part of the hydraulic cycle. So one can give the simple mathematical relationship. How, what are the inflow to the wetland system? What are the outflow from the wetland system, which is shown in the simple line diagram. So the inflows, the precipitation, surface water inflow, groundwater inflow, and outflow is groundwater outflow, surface water outflow, evapotranspiration, and evaporation. Then the remaining term, the difference of these two, we can give it the wetland storage. That is a change in storage over the time. Over the time, if you do it on weekly basis or monthly basis or annual basis. Annual basis, once you do it, is something like a mining. Will not. So it will be analyzed generally on weekly basis, at the most monthly basis on the wetland hydrological studies, because that will come to know address when I talk about the hydro period. One more term which I might have majority may not heard it. What is hydro period? So the same thing, well, the simple logical thing. What I am saying that, see, this is the watershed studies. Everyone has done it, but the part of the watershed before reaching the open water body or the deep waters, the wetlands, which is neglected. So these studies need to be addressed. This study need to be addressed. That is in the wetland. So what we are giving more concentration on the upland or the water storage, but the wetland hydrological studies neglected, which is almost of the fresh water, 6.5% of water is in the wetland. It is considerable wetland, and most of them near to the society. So the strategy to address this thing, the hydrological classification should be studied and recognized whether it is a wetland or not, and the scope need not be a fresh water, also it should be given to the wetland. And then once you do these things, so nowadays the technology is available, tools are available, so you can put it in the GIS platform, and then it is classifying, and then where all these things, how to be interlinked, it is very effective. Okay. Next, the classification scheme. There are a number of classification schemes are given by so many people, and of course, I'll discuss the major which one. Of course, with small modification, each countries are also having their own way of classifications. And then how this the hydraulic strategy should address the agriculture development, keeping in the mind of this wetland hydrology or wetlands in particularly. So these are some things. So finally, one of the good work presented by Bullock and Ackerman, the authors, they have reviewed the quite good work all over the world during that time and published the paper. Just I'll highlight it. I think I hope you can see the paper. So the role of wetland in hydrological cycle. So it is freely downloadable. If you type these things, and PDF file is available, one can go through it. The intention of exposing here, because I don't want to go much detail about only the literature. See, here they discuss about the wetland type by hydrological or floodplains or in general. So this discussion is given very clearly, and then the categorization of methodological approach to the wetland studies based on the catchment model, water balance, long-term hydrograph, single event hydrograph, trend analysis, component process, and chemical balance. Because within a 1.5 hours, I cannot cover these things, but the quite good work is taken place. So this will be a initial step for the most of the researchers. And next, the basis for interference of wetland function, that is with or without. So what should be how it should be done, and if it is a drain, if it is a paired, or if it is a multiple in and out, and if it is a combination. So that components also discussed. So here he has taken almost more than nearing 450 works, and he has discussed the hydrological measures in the wetland based on the mean annual flow, mean annual actual evaporation, wet period flow, wet period actual evaporation, dry period actual evaporation, dry period flow, and so on. So please go through that. And
sorry for the interruption.
On this, we
Nyamathi,
can.
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, the paper is not seen. I think your
hello?
Screen is paused. We cannot see the paper.
We cannot see the paper?
Yeah, I think this. No, sir.
Okay. Now?
Okay, I think the screen is okay, but are you displaying the paper, sir? No, sir.
Paper is not visible.
No, sir. Was that an hyperlink, sir, where you're trying to click?
Yeah, right. You are right.
No, sir. I don't think the paper is being displayed.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Because my class, I use hyperlink, it works.
Okay.
Okay. Now, then I will show it later at the end.
Okay.
Of this paper. Okay.
Okay.
Because that is a quite good work. And for particular researchers, keeping all those things here, we are study wetland delimitations, hydrological inputs, then the characteristics of internal wetland attributes such as hydrology, soils and vegetations and so on, and how to conserve it. And now this is the keeping this thing in mind. Of course, I'm taking 1/3 of the time, the necessity and important scope, because that should trigger for this wetland hydrological studies. So one need to understand or answer what is wetland, what is watershed management, what is unique about it. So for that sake, we need to understand what is wetland hydrology, and what are the benefits to the local governments of integrating wetlands into watershed management. We need to address it. Then only the importance of wetlands come to picture, and more specifically, the wetland hydrology. Then, how can integration of wetlands into the watershed management help to meet landowners' need? Because what the people think that the landowners of the wetland, no, what is the use of this land? I'll dispose of, or I'll use it for some other purpose, get converted to something and then use it. So we need to address the landowner needs and how that wetland is going to be beneficial for him. So this will come to the case studies in subsequent. Then how can integration of wetland into the watershed management to help the local government also? Okay, and then what context is the wetland and watershed management approach particularly needed? So it need not be always 100% times. There is majority of times which need to be addressed together. See, these are the good chunk length of questions need to be addressed. For all these things, what we need to give as a teachers as good as a researchers to answer all these things. So what the policy makers need from the researchers, we need to address as a academicians or a researcher. So keeping in mind accurate and timely information for formulating and implementing a wetland policy, and already majority of the countries have made it, and it is updating in our country and state also. And then what is the economic evaluation of ecological process and products, enhancing the understanding the hydrology, where my discussion supposed to be restricted, but to make it the usefulness of the work, so I'm stressing the all this behind the driving forces, and then assessing the on-site and off-site impacts. So we need to give an answer, and then the role of indigenous knowledge in the wetland. So okay, sometimes they say that it is done here and so on. So whether it is possible in Indian context or the local region, whether the same wetland can be maintained and make it as a fruitful for individual or nothing but the land users, society, and then the government and the country. So how it is, and for that requires the monitoring and changes of the trends. So now, what is wetland? So after all this discussion, then majority of thinking that what is wetland? There are three figures, you can see it. In the initial all three you may feel it as a something. It is a flat terrain type, and then with some water standing, and here it is some marshy areas, and here it is a water body. But here you can see the same thing, the system. This portion, that is a periphery, almost it is acting as a wetland. This also, water is not too deep, it is filled with hydrophytic vegetation, that is also wetland. This is also wetland in the periphery. So then what I mean to say, identifying the wetland is very important. Now, almost after half an hour or so, I'm trying to define the wetland. Because if I would have given the definition at the early stage of wetland, you will be just read it as a definition. Now, after discussing the what is just a wetland, values, briefly about functions, and the role of this wetland, and hydrologic study, how it is, what need to be answered by researchers. Then finally, you need to answer what is wetland. So wetlands are nothing but those are the areas inundated or saturated by the surface or groundwater hydrology at frequency and duration sufficient to support, and that under normal circumstances do support a prevalence of vegetation, nothing but a hydrophytes typically adopted for life in a saturated soil conditions. Saturated soil conditions, that is nothing but hydric soil. Of course, the date which you may get surprised, 2004. So it is during my PhD work, the photographs are taken. These are the wetlands, this is the upland, and this is a aquatic or the open water body. Okay, and maybe most of you, or except few, what is wetland? They think that is a wet, will be smelly, or it may be rotten material, or it is soft ground, it is difficult to move around, and it is breeding for diseases and bad air. That is what majority of the society thinks about wetland. Okay, and for some of participants also think like that. So these wetlands of the watershed are valuable natural resources. Wetlands are most productive ecosystem. Wetlands are most productive ecosystem, which serves a wide variety of functions which are beneficial to the health, safety, and welfare of the general public. So, how it is? By pinpointing the main functions, by retaining the stormwater runoff. See, that is the reason I given some simple line diagrams. Before, from uplands, before reaching the water bodies, it retains the storm runoff, which is also carrying the nutrients, and by that reducing the flood peaks, because directly it is not entering the stream, it is in the flood plains, that is a wetland, and then delaying the flood crest, means the peak value also it is reducing, and thereby reducing the flooding. So peak value is also reduced, and then the time to peak is also increase. Time to peak is also increase. Then I will show it with a simple graph in subsequently. Then protecting the quality and quantity of groundwater. So quality can be increased by proper maintaining these wetland, and quantity can be increased in the groundwater if we preserve this wetland. See, most of the places where the groundwater has deepened, mainly in that region you can find it wetlands are no more wetlands. So whatever the existing wetlands vanish due to one or the other reason. Next, it improves the surface water quality before entering to the water body, surface water. What are the nutrients and other things? It will be blocked by these wetlands. Okay, by storing the organic material, chemically breaking down or removing the pollutants in wetlands, and which is sorry, just a moment. By filtering the eroded sediments and organic matter from the surface runoff. and also stabilizing the soil and dissipating wave and current energy, particularly in the coastal areas where you want to, the wave action is more predominant in the water. Okay. Then providing sprawling, feeding, and general habitat for fish, providing wide diversity of habitat for wildlife, providing diversity of recreational and economic benefits, contributing to the open space character and overall beauty of the landscape if you maintain properly. Then, really, what has happened over the time? Over the time, the present scenario, these wetlands have been drained or converted to a farmlands filled for housing developments, industries or industrial facilities, and used for suitable for waste or to dispose the waste. And then the human activity continue, which are adversely affecting the wetland ecosystem. Or in other words, wetlands have been drained and converted quite fast. And also, the society has begun to understand the functions of wetlands and its values. Now it is a time to take the researchers to highlight the importance of wetland and its hydrological process. So in that context, this is one of the important discussion, I feel. So wetlands help to regulate the water level within the watershed and with the improved water quality by reducing the flood damage or storm damages and making a more provision for the fish and wildlife habitat, that is aquatic life, and also support for fishing and recreational activities. So that is the reason one need to stress on the wetland. Now, briefly I will discuss the wetland classification system. So there are different classification system already I discussed with respect to source of water. With respect to source of water, that is whether it is a surface water dominated or precipitation dominated or groundwater dominated. So there we are going to give the type of wetland and with names generally used. But here the another classification, particularly in the coastal region, say. So broadly you can classify coastal wetlands and inland wetlands. So in the inland wetlands already I discussed the surface water dominated or groundwater dominated or precipitation dominated. But in the coastal, just to give a simple brief idea, it is broadly classified into major marine, estuarine, riverine, lectus, palustrine. So what really depend upon the salinity and other things. So just I'll glance it. See, that is a, if it is a ocean before reaching. So depending on these places, we find it is a wetlands. Okay. So these wetlands, depending upon the salt or the, what you can say, the salinity based on the percentage of that, that is a 30 ppm or 0.5 ppm or less than 0.5 ppm. So the different classification of wetland or those classification will going to pinpoint what is the main characteristics. So if you take the marine characteristics with respect to the uplands and ocean, so how it is going to be intertidal, subtidal, and intertidal. So here you can expect the wetland. We can space the wetland and then the salt marsh. Okay. So this is readily available in the material. One can download it. Just I'll glance it. See what is my intention here. So in the coastal line, the erosion is taking place. Every year we are facing so much problem. But it is not so. We have encroached these wetlands earlier and you try to feed it, and human settlement is it. It is a nature's playground. So the wetland is nature's playground. So which we are encroaching. So that is a salt marsh. That is transition zone, high marsh, salt perine, high marsh, So the characteristics are shown with respect to the water body here. And also estuarine, this is in the river mouth, near to the river mouth. Okay. And riverine, here you can get the wetland, because I need to show where all these wetlands, okay, the possibility such that one should be able to identify the where the wetland will be. Okay. Now, okay, that looks with respect to the supporting system, but as an technocrat, as an engineer, always we think to produce or discuss the identification with a very specific, that is a quantitative and qualitative information. Broadly, one can identify the wetlands based on the hydrological characteristics, that is wetland hydrology, linked to the hydric soil characteristics and vegetation. When all these three fulfills, the characteristics of wetland, then one can identify it as a wetland. So once I say the field indicators of wetland hydrology, that is mainly with visual observation of inundation, visual observation of soil saturation. If we take a small bore or hole, or water is moisture content is there, water is there, and water marks during some part of the time, water is above the ground, and waterborne debris deposition, particularly in the above ground vegetation, waterborne sediment deposits on the plants and other vertical objects, drainage pattern within the wetlands, including scoring, water stained leaves, and etc. So it's simple line figures I can show. It is already flooded. There is a possibility this area may be wetland, saturated soil, possibility. Debris, flood debris, if you go visit, there is a possibility of a wetland. And silt stained leaves, okay, water marks on the trees here. And then as per the records, these are some of the indicators of wetland. Next, along with this wetland hydrological characteristics, so we need to answer with the hydrophytic vegetation. What type of plants? So the list of plants system, among them, which are the wetland plants we have to list out based on the help of botany people. Then some areas, if it is more than 99% of the vegetation, that is nothing but a hydrophytic vegetation, then what you call it the obligate wetlands. As we move towards the uplands, as we move towards the upland, the wetland vegetation goes on, percentage of wetland plants are goes on decreases. But in uplands also sometimes you may find wetland plants, so it should not be treated as a wetland. There is, if there less than somewhere 33% and below, so then we should not treat it as wetland. Okay, it can be constructed wetland, or it may be small portion. So depending upon how much area it is, whether it can be treated or not treated. Okay. So your flower pot should not be treated as a wetland. That is what I mean to say. Okay. Field indicators of hydric soil. So vegetation, hydrology. Now the soil. So for that, there is a quite good manuals are readily available. That is a soil color chart and how it looks, what are the composition, and much organic matter, clay soil. So just it may be a glazy soil, bright mottles are visible. So manuals are available. So we have to talk about how much organic matter and what state. What state it is. So now, keeping this thing in mind, what is how to identify with the present these things. So vegetation characteristics. Sorry. Okay. Consists. So first one is hydrology, vegetation, soil, characteristics to be discussed to identify the wetland. Vegetation nothing but consists of macrophytes that are typically adapted to areas having hydrologic and soil condition. Okay, so this hydroponic species, due to morphological, physiological, and reproductive adaptation, and will have a ability to grow effectively and compete, reproduce, and or persist in anaerobic soil condition. In anaerobic soil condition, such vegetation, that is a environmental characteristics of a hydroponic vegetation. And then the soil, So soils are present and have been classified as a hydric. So one should be able to classify. The indicators are given, characteristics are given. So based on that, whether it is hydric or not, one need to classify it. And what all they process are associated with the reducing soil condition. That is, it should be a hydric soil. And next, hydrology. The area should be inundated either permanently or periodically at mean water depth. Generally, it is less than 2 meters or 6.6 feet, or saturated soil to the surface at some point during the growing season, of hydrophytic vegetation. The prevalent vegetation is hydrophytic vegetation. So the technical approach, the guidelines are readily available. With some modification, each countries are accepted based on the hydrology, soil, and vegetation. So this is upland, here wetland, it is a aquatic life. Okay, the same with the background I am giving it. So this is upland, this is the wetland, this is the aquatic habitat or a water body. So vegetation, all this, of course, I will not go much detail. Again, the vegetation is a function of light, temperature, soil texture, permeability, man-induced disturbances, along with the hydrological factors overriding the influence of species, plant, which are based on the morphological, physiological, and reproductive adaptation. So that is where hydrophytic vegetation is exists, and more in particular, the what you can say that it is in the saturated condition, and you find it this vegetation more of a tubular structure in stem, and which allows the oxygen to reach the root system, which allows the oxygen to reach the root system of that hydrophytic vegetation. See, this is the figure, shows the such dominant hydrophytic vegetation. And of course, it is a floating, the combination of that. Then the hydric soil may be either drained or undrained, and drained hydric soil may not continue to support the hydrophytic vegetation. So you have to see that whether it is drained or undrained, whether it can support or not support. So, or in other words, the wetlands, and only when hydric soil supports hydrophytic vegetation and area has indicators of wetland hydrology. Okay, don't just take it as a manual and say that it is hydric soil. It should support the hydrophytic vegetation and it should have a indicator of wetland hydrology. Okay, now the profile of this wetland soil can be shown in the this time general profile. Hope you can see it. The organic soil and mineral soils, generally which is given in these logs. So which are present, which are not present. So this is one of the sample which has collected to decide whether it is a hydric soil or not after considering the wetland hydrology and vegetation. This is a sample and it is analyzed and concluded it is a hydric soil. Just to give some more varieties of hydric soil. And then the wetland hydrology, again, as I already discussed, it is supported by precipitation, topography, soil permeability, and wetland vegetation. Again, depending upon the water stored in the non-tidal. See, earlier I was discussing about the tidal. Non-tidal means it's a surface in the. So depending upon the water standing above the ground and in the root system, some areas which are permanently inundated, but that water level never crosses more than 2 meters. Never crosses more than 2 meters. Such areas we can expect the wetlands. And here some areas, depending upon the ranges, we can expect. But here there is a more possibility of finding the wetland when water level is more than 25 centimeter above the ground and less than 75 centimeter above the ground, and in the earth, that is in the soil's root system, it will be varying between 12.5 centimeter to 12.5% of the duration to 25% of the duration. In this region, we can expect the wetland more of good characteristics. So wetland hydrological indicators, you can see some of the watermarks here. Okay, because this will not watermark is there for months, because when this land is getting inundated with a longer period, these watermarks are readily visible on the trees. And then here, these are the wetland indicators. So here, when it is in the dry period, so you can see the ecosystem. This is one of the beautiful photograph. It is just behind the KREC campus, that is presently National Institute of Technology, Karnataka, Surathkal campus. So now these are some more indicators. So, but that is goes pictorial. Now, what you are interested, the same thing with a graphical, with respect to time, the level of water. This red line indicates the ground level. So above the ground level and below the ground level. So this is the water levels fluctuating over a month, in a year. It is a 1 year scale. So that is what you can call the stream swamp, such wetlands. It is a alluvial swamp. This is a Pocosine. See, water level is just a few centimeters above the ground, and of course sometimes it goes more deeper, but this is what you can call the hydro period, during this period. Okay, and here throughout the year water level is just slightly above the ground and below the ground. So that is where you can expect the quite good wetlands. Okay, but here only part of the growing season of a wetland we can expect the such as swamps. Okay, there are different hydrological. See, these will give, because the hydrological characteristics, that is with respect to the water level in a region, will give some idea whether it is a wetland with support of soil and vegetation, or it can be converted to wetland or not. Okay. So now wetland identification and delineation with keeping this thing in mind. So how it should be delineated? Because if you want to do the any hydrological studies, where it should be done, where it is geographically located, and what is the boundary of this wetland. And for that, we need to first identify it. For that, we discuss the indicators, wetland hydrology, hydric soil, hydrophytic vegetation. And then that is a point data at that particular location, how far it is. So for that, we have a delineation method. The delineation method is given by the manual. I don't know whether this can be opened or not. I'll check it. Is it visible?
No, sir.
Crop of Engineers Wetland Delineation Model Manual.
No, sir. Sir, I think if you share the screen as a screen and not PPT, it will be visible. Whole screen should be shared.
Okay. That I'll show at a later stage. At the end, last 5
Okay.
minutes, I'll give this material. Who are interested, they can download it and they can go further studies on the topic. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So in the delineation manual also, there is no very specific. So in 1987 they are given, 89 they are modified, 91, and within the same country over the time scale they are varying it. They are varying it. That is a National Food and Security Act manual here also. See, in the US itself, to decide the hydrology of hydrological threshold, depth, and growing season for wetland hydrological study, means it is still very early stage during that time. Now it is very clearly mentioned and one can go ahead with the identification. And we need to collect the data. So just to give an example, the broader sense topo sheets, wherever the hydrological characteristics fulfills, and go and check it. It is a Pawanji River in the upstream side. This is the Arabian Sea. Okay, here it is just meeting it. Okay, so this area I'm zooming it again. So this portion I'm zooming it, and here the study is the photograph which I'm showing it is from here, and this is the NITK campus. Okay, this is the NITK campus. This is from the extracted from topo sheets almost 20 years back. And next, when you go to the site, and these forms are readily available in the delineation manual. Okay, so you can modify this contents according to suit your conditions. So hydric, that is what is the general characteristics of study area, hydrology, soils, and finally one should, there is vegetation, hydrology, soils, and then you should say that whether it is a wetland or not. One need to pinpoint it. So now for delineation purpose, one can do the level one is on-site inspection is unnecessary. Means by seeing all the things, information which they give it in our office, okay, this is already wetland. So Chilka wetland, this is West Bengal. See, this is already well defined. We doesn't need to go. Only for demarcation you need to go it. Okay. Then the on-site inspection is new areas. So one need to do it. So this flowchart is I prepared it, and since the time is very limited, how the on-site inspection is done. So just I will give an overview. So collect all the information in this vegetation, hydrology, and soil, where you are thinking that it is supposed to be a wetland or might be wetland. Then first, while doing that thing, you try to collect all these basic three information. First, go for the vegetation. That is, if vegetation doesn't exist, then you will go to the level 3. That is atypical. That is a special case. Okay, where you doesn't find the hydrophytic vegetation. Then if it is present, then check for the hydrological aspects, characteristics. And if it is no, then we can say it is a not a wetland. And if it is hydrology is present, then check for the soils. Check for the soils. See, this is the vegetation is above the ground, which can see it. The hydrology above and below the ground. Okay. Then hydric soil below the ground. So these are the major steps to be followed to identify it. And further, it is based on the whether it is inspection is necessary or unnecessary. So if it is, the information is readily available by sitting in the office already, we can say it is a inspection is unnecessary, and still we can conclude it is a wetland or not. Okay. Next, if it is a necessary, again we are going to classify which I was talking. The area is very important. So if it is area is smaller area, we analyze in some aspects. If it is a bigger area, our assessment and identifying is slightly varying. So if it is less than that, but the characters are same. Again, first we'll check the vegetation, then we'll check the hydrology, and then we'll check the soils. So these steps are given in that manual. The same, some 20 pages steps with a detailed explanation. I have put it in the flow chart, whether it can be treated as a wetland or not. Okay. So how is the atypical? That is you have to make a mark and then you have to draw the transits and then go on saying that okay, wetland of. So here I can show the same thing in the this diagram. This is a particular type of wetland. This is a particular type of wetland. This may be a particular type of wetland, and this may not be a wetland, or this side may not be a wetland, uplands. So what percentage of that vegetation, what type of soil? So it is a natural stream. So see the demarcation of that wetland. There, within that, some variation. Okay. The same thing. When you make it, you can have a marking like this, or the wetland boundary, you can give it like this, and it may be a water body and so on. So how it will be delineated, and how the soil color is used along with other features. So atypical, that is what I was taking. If you could not, then that is nothing but a problem area. You need a detailed investigation. So now, keeping this thing in mind, yeah, hydrology, wetland hydrology. What is the necessity of this wetland hydrology studies? The common term, which you might have heard it, or I've already pinpointed: freshwater marsh, or fen, bog, swamp. So what all this distribution of hydrology? It is a widespread, seasonal to permanent flooding, intertidal zones. So all these things, the hydrologic wetland hydrological characteristics, and it is supported by a biota, that is a vegetation and other species. Other species. Biota is such as the grasses, sedge, and frogs. You can find it in the marshes, and in the fen, sedge, grasses, shrubs, and trees. We find it, and in the bog, you will find it is a sorghum moss and so on. So that is the main characteristics. Then again, this is also material I'll give it at the end. So to identify the hydrological function, because wetland hydrology, I'm saying that, of course, the mathematics wetland water balances looks very simple, but what are their functions to give the societal value? So the short-term surface water storage or long-term surface water storage, maintenance, high water level table, what are the effects? It reduces the flood peaks. It long-term surface water storage. So throughout the year, we can expect the stream flow. See how it is linked. See, this answers the floods. Okay. Short-term surface water storage. Long-term surface water storage, rivers running dry. It gives the answer for that. So rivers can flow continuous throughout the year. And then the maintaining the hydrophytic vegetation, if we maintain the proper. So that is what I am, we are stressing, that effect and how it is the societal value. See, if we stress these things, any society or administrators or decision makers certainly will accept our views, for which we need to have a detailed hydrological investigation in these wetlands, and you must be able to pinpoint how much reduction in flood peak you can do it by this your wetland, and how long the stream can run without drying up after the rainy season. So that should be supported by research, by hydrological, wetland hydrological study. That is what I am going to highlight it here. Of course, biochemical and other web, I will not be stressing this thing. So this is what the wetlands, which I already discussed. So these wetlands, as on pinpointed in the earlier, the hydrological criteria, vegetation, and then the soil. So this soil can be supported by saturated substratus, and also vegetation will be supported by saturation and inundation. So for which how with respect to definition, what is the criteria, what are the general indicator and specific indicators. So this should be done by the expert group of experts for a particular reason, because the knowledge of the hydrophytic vegetation is very important and type of soils is very much important, because as a civil engineers in general, we may not be having a thorough knowledge of this vegetation and soils. So we need to take the support from the respective specialization. We should not outrightly say that with the available literature. Okay, for initial investigations, all right. But before concluding it is a wetland, we need to. So now the same thing, the wetland hydrological water balance, what is comes in to the system, what goes out. So we need to make it is how much the evaporation and evapotranspiration takes place. And it should be supported with the values of water quality. See, now what is I am targeting is expressing wetland values for decision making. First, identify and define the wetland economic benefits, and try to, we need to quantify it, wetland goods and services, and link with the physical effects on the wetland from changes in management and its uses, and also link to the impacts on wetland on quality, quantity, and distribution of these values. Okay, so then it need to be integrated with the socio-economics, then only the wetland you can make it as a safe in a long run. So to make it very clear, what are the direct values, one need to pinpoint it. What are the indirect values, we need to address it quantitatively. And what are the optional values, and what are the non-use values. Okay, so how to address, some people may give it in another way also, tangible benefits and intangible benefits. That is nothing but a, which we can give the monetary value or may not give the monetary values. Here the direct values, where can you directly get the benefits immediately, such as fresh water, fishes, firewood. Means directly from wetland you can take it and use it. But indirect, it is a water quality is improved. Okay, nutrients is separated, and water storage, and then the flood attenuation. It is a indirect benefits. So these are the some of the wetland hydrological. Based on that, we can see that the names and how it looks. See, this is a bog, vernal pools, wet meadows, wet belt, and of course, these are all downloaded, some of the photographs from the study area. Now, what is I am targeting? Sir, someone may ask, sir, is it possible to have a marsh areas? Okay, now I want to develop it. And nowadays people are talking about, the wetland is we are making here, construct a wetland. But as per the literature review, and even I am convinced, the wetlands cannot be created overnight. Wetlands cannot be created overnight. Even though artificially you may make it as the wetland characteristics, but to attain the wetland process functions, it takes few years to decade. Unless until it is, see, this marsh area is taken place over the decades or a year. But now people are just putting it and from vegetation. Now we are saying that is a constructed wetland. Okay, it does it, but not to the equivalent to the natural wetland. So nowadays, this wetland concept is used for wastewater treatment, organic wastewater treatment. Then the bog sequence, how it becomes a bog. So this is a simple line diagram representing the and hydro period. That is what I was talking. How frequently it is going to be, how long, and what are the timings and extent. So how it should be addressed. So in the wetland hydrological process, the main components one need to collect: precipitation, evaporation, transpiration. It may be direct collection or what you can estimation with available tools and techniques. Surface water, groundwater, generally the weekly, monthly, and annually, and finally summary, along with the hydro period and how much is the surface, subsurface storage, and supported by specific yield, permeability, type of soil, how much is the mineral soil, how much is the organic soil, and how long it is detention, and how much it is depression storage. So all these things, that is with respect to depth and with respect to duration. Okay, that is a simple mass balance equation can be used with these things, and then one can give the hydrological wetland studies with a water balance or water budget components. Okay, so I don't want to go in much detail. It is most of the things are extension of hydrological process. And another work, some more works were done by Peacock and Hess in 2004. So what all this during that time itself, they have finally say that the increased requirement for accurate calculation of hydraulic flux through wetland is required to address the functions and values. And it becomes the greatest challenge for wetland scientists to supply the information in designing and conducting field and laboratory experiment. And so some of the on this wetland hydrology quite good work is taking place, and major works during somewhere in 1990s and 2000 during that time, and afterwards quite these are the some of the base work which are done on the hydrological aspects. Earlier it was more of environment and ecology, but as a hydrologist interfered. Of course, these are majority of the not the hydrologist. Again, these are the, but they are little concentrated on the hydrologist. Then sun. So these are the some of the literature. See how this layer should be taken in the when you are making a hydrological studies in a wetland. So one need to do the even root system. You see, when I did a study, it has every 30 centimeter as a one layer, 30 to 50 centimeter as one, layer 2, layer 3. See, that level of investigation is required. And then how the wetland, then see this I'll I'll take it as a wetland. This is a upland. See, when you are going to put it in the GIS plot for the water budget studies, we have to be very careful about information. So there is simple mass balance equation. There are already models. Existing model can be used for the wetland hydrological studies. Just give the information with some unknown parameters, one can get it. Okay. Now, what really we are finding it is important knowledge gaps still remain. Basic studies are needed on the fundamental process of wetlands, particularly hydrology. Calibration of models exposes the problems in the measured data inputs and so improves the actual the accuracy of the final production. So this conclusion I'm saying that based on this literature, some of them. Okay. And next, wetlands, integrate concepts are necessary for wise protection, management, monitoring, and reconstruction of wetlands wherever you have lost it. So that is what I can pinpoint it. Wetland research is needed to obtain a better understanding of the structure and functioning of wetland. And in this process, basic knowledge about the wetland and ecology of the wetland ecosystem is essential as a basis for developing a plans for wetlands and making decisions about their management. Or in more recent decades, focus is changing. The hydrologist must be more imaginative, provocative in contributing a knowledge to underpin policy formulation and management decisions. Okay. So now what I want to concentrate here, sometimes when we started almost 2 decades back, almost 15 years back, when I started the research work on wetland hydrology, everybody has thought that what is there in investigation. But these wetlands are really the main source of all the problem happening because we lost it. And to correct these things, this wetland hydrological phenomena, understanding that is very much important. So that is what I mean to say. We should have a hydrologist have not pure mathematics, or we should have imaginative, and then trying to link it with a proper quantitative and qualitative information. So what I want to say that at the end, for hydrological committee, a new challenge is set for the wetland policy, and it should be answered by the wetland hydrologist. So now human impact, just I'll glance it very fast. I'll not discuss hydrological alteration of wetlands, what all those things that is we have lost it, water diversion structures, impoundment, or in most just best example, the periphery of the lake in Bangalore itself. We lost it. Those are wetlands. They never thought it is a wetland. Okay. Then urbanization and so on. How to protect and mitigative measures. Just to give a based on economic, technological, and measures. But common pitfalls, why we are not able to pinpoint it? Mainly because of accurately estimate or lack of awareness of the following, that is hydrofeed, water depth, water supply, substrate, nutrient levels, and toxic components. See, these information, that is what I want to say, the wetland hydrology is very much important for sustainable development of a society. Okay, now how it can be improved. Just of course, these slides I'll give it to the coordinator. She will pass it, they will pass it to you. So this is because already timing is running out. I can see the coordinator is giving a indirect hint. Okay, but these things I'll pass it now. Just I want to just 2 minutes I'll take. Okay, buffering, that is what we need to understand also when you are making the wetlands. See, as in civil engineers, we say that we build the nation. Where we build the nation? At what cost? So what I suggest for all civil engineers, in particularly structural and other infrastructure development, don't destroy these wetlands. Don't destroy the wetlands. I'm happy to say that the wetland is not destroyed in Indonesia, because see what they have done it in most of the Indian contests. Wherever wetland is there, the road they want to take it, just they fill it and take it. Almost 20 kilometer stretch of wetland, they have constructed a bridge They have not destroyed the wetland. It is marvelous. I traveled almost 10 kilometer stretch when I visited almost 10 years back. See, the nature we need to protect. Don't buffer zone should be protected. Okay, whatever the projects already taken place, it may be irreversible, but for future projects, I request the people who are in the developmental activities, particularly in the buffer zones, should not be used by development of civil works, but it can be retained for the wetland development. So by giving the what are the main values of wetlands? So this wetlands, see what we are thinking that it is a bad and small. See, this is a wetland. Now this wetland is converted to such a beautiful place for residents. Okay. So earlier it was wet, smell, rotten material, soft. This is the same thing they converted and they have made a residential area. It is a now resort. So some more this discussion. See, this is another wetland. How it works? So one should answer it. And for the real world, to get this information, we need such a instrument vehicles to go in the wetland areas and collect the information which is missing. These are the data collection center in the wetland, all the meteorological data. I don't know how far we can provide these infrastructure in our wetlands. Okay, it is not too far, we can do it in coming years. Okay. So now one can find the Society of Wetland Scientists. So that I'll show it in the website. So thank you.